Hi there, and welcome to my brand new channel. I'm Julia, and I'm a teacher and self-taught illustrator from lovely Oldenburg, northern Germany. I want to share with you my process of creating this illustration here, and hopefully provide a lot of helpful tips and tricks on how I use Procreate to create an illustration. Now, as you can see, I already laid down my sketch, and I did a very rough one at first. This was my first sketch. And then I refined it to make it look a bit more sophisticated. And then I also created a color thumbnail to kind of know which colors I want to use and which colors go where. And I put a watercolor paper texture over my illustration and set it to linear burn. You can get this watercolor paper texture on my Ko-fi. It's free, so I will link that down below. Yes, now I just recently discovered a mood board app, which is called Visrev. Which is called Visrev. And what I'm doing here is I'm using that mood board app to reference my color thumbnail. So instead of using it in Procreate, I find it a bit easier to just put it over to the side, even though it doesn't look like here, like it is very easy. But yes, I just put it on the side and then I know which colors I want to put where. I'm setting my sketch layer to multiply. This helps me to see it a bit better when I start coloring in. And I also reduce the opacity a bit. Yes, and then the first thing I'm doing is just to do a color block. So I put all the main colors down. And here I'm using a brush I just got from a Domestica class I recently took. It was a great class by Lucy Fleming, and it's one of her brushes. I will link it down below. It's the Charcoal Smooth, I think. And obviously I'm creating a new layer here because it's very helpful to have all your different parts on different layers. Yes, and now for the second hill, I tried something else, something I've actually never tried before. I didn't color it with a brush. Instead, I used the selection tool. You can see that kind of lasso thing up there. And I just selected the part and then did a color drop. So I dragged from the little square. No, it's not a square. I dragged the color from the little circle and just dragged it into the selection. So I'm doing the next one with the selection 2, and I cut that out, but I remember I struggled quite a lot with it, so it took me a long time to get that selection, and it's still not perfect. So I think I will go in with the brush. I'm using the Shale Brush here. It's a Procreate Native brush, and I think I discovered that when I watched a class by Mimi Chow, and she uses it all the time, and I really like it too. And I do all my sketching with this Shale Brush. So now on a new layer, I'm coloring in the trees, and I don't know how much I cut out of that, so I had to cut quite a lot out because otherwise this whole video would have been, I think, about 4 to 5 hours. And I also sped up quite a lot. But what I did here is I tried all kinds of different brushes for the trees. And I ended up using a gouache brush that I bought from Lisa Glance. I think I've got all her, or nearly all her brush sets. And here you can see I'm switching brushes all the time. And I would really encourage you to do that, like especially if you're just color blocking, to try out all the different brushes you can use in Procreate. For the longest time, so I've been painting in Procreate for 2 years now, maybe around 2 years. And before that, I just painted traditionally, so I did a lot of watercolor and some drawing and so on. And when I first started out painting digitally, I really didn't enjoy it. And it was Lisa Glance who put the fun into painting with Procreate, because I really enjoyed painting with her brushes. And yes, I think here I decided on using one of the gouache brushes, one of the gouache brushes, and I stuck with that then. Yes, and there I realized that I used brown for a tree that I actually wanted to be another color, so I erased that. And you know, this is all very fast now, but basically it's just me coloring in the trees using 3 different colors. I kind of like using colors that are not common for the things that that they are normally in. That sentence came out totally wrong. So, you know, making a sun blue or using a white on a tree. Though, if I think about it now, I think these are birch trees. They are white. Anyways, so I made a group there, and I put all the trees in there. So, and what I'm doing now is I will be coloring in these kinds of bushes, or whatever they are. I created a color palette for this piece based on an illustration I found on Pinterest, and I really like that color palette. I might show to you later which illustration I mean, but I also used colors that I typically use. So this yellow, for instance, is a typical yellow that I use in my illustrations, and that pink you just saw in the bushes, that pink that you just saw in the bushes is a pink I also really like to use in my illustrations. Yes, so this is just me filling in more colors. Now I did all my color blocking, and what I'm doing here is I'm creating a layer mask, a clipping mask, and I'm setting that layer to alpha log, and I'm working on that first hill there, and I'm using the eyedropper to use that same, or to get that same kind of blue, but then I think in a minute I will just make it a bit darker. Yes, I realized there that it's the same color, so you can't see the brush stroke. So, and I'm making that a bit darker. And what I'm doing here is I'm just painting on it, kind of in the same direction as this hill goes. And I just want to create some interest there, so it doesn't look too flat. Yes, and that's just what I'm doing. Now I'm also picking another darker value now here. And I'm speeding that up again. So now I'm going to the clipping mask. I put above the layer and I'm setting it to multiply. And here I'm using my alcohol ink stamps from my Watercolor Love set. I will link that down below as well. And what I'm doing here is I'm stamping on these alcohol ink blobs. And for every color, I will be using another layer, and if I want to move that blob around, I also create a new layer. And there I duplicate it to see if it looks better, if it's a bit more intense, but I decide against it. So I'm using a white here, and this is what happens when it's not a clipping mask. So you can see it reaches out beyond the turquoise hill. And now I made it a clipping mask, and it just applies to that hill. Yes, here I duplicated that white blob to make it look a bit more intense. And then I'm using a very dry brush to create some more marks. Make that a clipping mask as well. Yes, and to have not too many layers in the end, because I use a lot of layers and I tend to run out of them in the end, I try to pinch together layers that I feel like I like them and they can stay that way. If I'm not sure, I don't pinch them together. I keep everything on separate layers, but in this case I was quite satisfied with the result, so I made them one layer, and that will probably help me when I get to the end of the illustration. Now here I'm creating another clipping mask. No, first I set the layer to alpha lock, which makes my brush strokes apply to just that particular layer and not reach out beyond. Is that the right word? Yes, what I'm doing here is I'm also using colors that are not in the blue spectrum. So I'm using a yellow and might be using a pink later on. No, I'm not. And this is something I really like to do, is to, you know, put in some unexpected colors. So this is a blue hill, but who says it can't have some specks of yellow or green or, I don't know, pink in it. And I didn't do that with the other hill, but with this one I really enjoyed the effect. So again, I'm using clipping masks and my alcohol ink stems to give that hill a texture, setting it to multiply there to make it, oh no, linear burn, to make it look a bit more intense. And yes, using the Shale Brush again to do some mark making. Pinching some of the layers together. Okay, and I will be doing the same to the last layer. And I sped that up again, so you won't have to endure an 8-hour-long video. Yes, here I created that alcohol ink blob, and I played quite a lot with the blending modes. Yes, and then I came back to the trees, and I kind of struggled with the trees. I painted on them and I didn't really like it, and then I decided to use alcohol ink again, and yes, and then I immediately liked that effect, and again played with the blending modes and ended up using the screen blending mode, reducing the opacity a bit. It seems I didn't end up with the screen, but with the, what is it? Ah, the screen. Yes, and this is something I just found out with this illustration. What I'm doing here is I'm using the eraser with a watercolor brush, I think it was, and just dabbing on the alcohol ink blobs I put above the tree, and that erases part of that very vibrant kind of yellowish color and makes the tree look even more interesting. So yes, I'm doing that same process now for all the other trees. I'm using alcohol ink blobs to create some interests, and I use them with clipping masks. Ah yes, and here I already realized that I'm I kind of like the trees, but there's something bothering me, and I will come back to that later on. And what I'm doing here is I'm trying to do some kind of like cutouts, it looks. So I created some shadows, I multiplied the layer, and then I made it completely black and shifted it to the side a bit. But that, of course, just, you know, gives a kind of paper cutout effect. That's not what I wanted. So I think I will delete that later on. And here you can see me drawing a moon on a new layer, of course. And then I'm using the hue saturation brightness to make it brighter, and I realized that I like it more when it's kind of a white. And then I'm getting back to the last trees. Here I'm also painting them a bit, but I think I will use a clipping mask with these alcohol ink stamps later on as well. Oh no, here I'm painting some kind of very subtle pattern on the tree. This is something that I really enjoy in illustrations, when there are kind of random patterns on things like trees and stones and animals and so on. So it is something I should do more. I didn't do it that much with this illustration, but I think I will keep that in mind and maybe do it with my next illustration. Now I'm getting to the bugs, and here you can see me struggling. I realized that I had put that head of the second bug on the wrong layer, so I put it on the same layer as the bigger bug, and then I needed to cut that out and put it on the right layer. Yes, sometimes I do use the Brush Studio to change the settings of my brush. You could just see that a minute ago, probably more like 15 seconds ago. And what I'm usually changing is the streamline. So I don't tend to draw with the streamline up, because I like it when my lines are wonky and look handmade. But sometimes it helps to have a bit more streamline in there. And I don't know, maybe I put it up there with the bugs. So this is something I change from time to time. Yes, I think what I'm doing now is I'm duplicating the moon, and then I use the new layer, which I put beneath the other moon, and I set that layer to Gaussian blur. And what that does is it creates some kind of glowing effect. So again, here you can see me coloring in the bushes, and first painting on the bushes with some kind of watercolor brush, or brush I really love is the Turpentine brush, Procreate Native brush, and then I'm putting a clipping mask above them and using some alcohol ink stamps on these bushes as well. Yes, there you can see me pondering whether I want to keep these bushes or not, and I decide not to have them in there, although they kind of framed the illustration. But I think maybe it was the color that bothered me, I don't know, but then I kept them out and I kind of forgot about them later on. So what I'm doing here is something that I learned in the Lucy Fleming class I mentioned before. I'm putting these lines onto the background layer where there is where you can see my sky, this very dark sky, and this makes it look kind of a bit magical. So yes, I'm putting some lines there, and I'm using a or two texture brushes. One again was from Lucy Fleming herself, from the Domestica class, and one texture brush by Lisa Glantz. I think it was the Shy Canvas. Now again, using clipping masks with the alcohol ink stamps. And at this point I'm quite happy with the illustration, and I'm quite amazed that it didn't take me hours and hours. So I'm still very new, like I said, to using Procreate, especially in that way. Before I created some patterns with it, but I very recently started, I think it's now 7 months ago that I started really doing illustrations in Procreate. And when I look at my canvas information later on, I very often see that I, took 9 or 10 or 11 hours to finish an illustration, because probably because I try out so many things. So I'm trying out all different kinds of brushes and then moving things from here to there, and I'm not happy with the results, so I'm doing stuff new. And like I said, it takes me quite a long time, and I think at this point I might be doing 2 or 3 hours without the sketch, so maybe more like, yes, probably like 3 or 4 hours at this point. And like I said, at this point I'm already quite kind of happy. Part of it is the colors. I really like that color palette, and I think the other part is that I like that I used all of these different alcohol ink blobs on these illustrations. So I've done that before, but not that often, or not like when I do one illustration, I don't use a whole lot of these stamps in the illustration. But here I really like the look. So putting some marks on the back of that little buggy. Yes, and what I'm doing now is I'm putting a layer mask on my sketch layer. So I still got my sketch layer turned on, and sometimes I like to keep parts of that sketch layer, and instead of just erasing the parts that I don't want, I put a layer mask above them, and then I work with a black brush, and when I paint on that layer mask with a black brush, it looks like it erases these parts that I paint over, and it actually doesn't erase them. So if I later on decide that I want to get back some parts of that sketch layer, I can just use a white brush and then make these parts reappear again. So this is what I did there. Just putting some more elements on the ground. Erasing, or not erasing, painting over some parts of my sketch. Here again to make it disappear, all the lines that I don't want to keep.